Hi, this is Ken Ruff, and I'm going to be going over a Shogi opening strategy called Mukaibisha, also known as opposing Rook. And basically, someone on the 81 Square Universe forums asked about for information on Mukaibisha strategy, and I had a book by Watanabe that covered Mukaibisha, so I thought I'd read up on it a little bit and then present the information. Um, so today we're going to be going over White's Mukaibisha against Black's Static Rook Anaguma. Mukaibisha can be played by either side. It's more commonly going to be played by White though. So let's just go ahead and get into the moves. Um, Black is going to go ahead and play a standard Static Rook opening by opening the bishop's diagonal and then pushing his Rook pawn. And White's also going to go ahead and go into Static Ranging Rook opening. So this is the point where it's going to deviate a little bit from standard Static Rook against Ranging Rook, and Black is going to go ahead and push his Rook pawn to 2e. If Black decides not to push this pawn here, then White is either going to have to try and play 4th or 3rd file Rook instead, or he can maybe try and stall a little bit, waiting for Black to push this pawn to 2e, and then he can play opposing Rook. But let's just go ahead and see what happens here. Basically, if you wanted to stall here, and Black doesn't push this 2e pawn, maybe you can go ahead and bring your bishop over. Maybe he'll start castling. You'll bring your silver up, and then you bring your silver up to here, because you're going to end up bringing these pieces up in this formation anyway. So maybe you can wait until here, maybe, to decide where you want to swing your rook to. But if he doesn't push the pawn now, and he goes into some other line, maybe he goes ahead and brings his bishop up trying to catch for Anaguma, it's thought to be better for you to go ahead and swing your rook to the 4th or 3rd files instead. And you'll see why it's very important that Black has his pawn pushed to 2e before we try and go for Mukaibisha. Because once he sees that we go ahead and try and play opposing rook, he's not going to push his pawn. But since we're going to go for a more standard line, let's just assume that Black does push his pawn. And obviously now he's threatening another pawn push to 2d here, so we have to defend by the bishop. And Black would go ahead and develop his silver. And this is when White is going to go ahead and now swing his rook over to the 2nd file, because Black already has his pawn pushed to 2e. I guess we'll talk about the basic idea of Mukaibisha right here, once White has swung his rook. The idea for White is to go ahead and make his own camp strong against rook drops from Black, and then to go ahead and try and trade the rooks on the 2nd file, and go ahead and hopefully he's made it so that his camp is strong against rook drops and Black's camp is weaker against rook drops, and therefore the rook trade will be in his favor. White's going to go ahead and try and castle his king into a Mino castle, and Black, since we're going over Mukaibisha against an Anaguma strategy, we're going to say that Black goes for Anaguma here. So they're going to both keep castling. Obviously, White is going to go ahead into his Mino castle. Black opens the hole, and he's going to go into it. And here, White has an option of where to move this gold on for A. He has two options. He can move it to 5b, or he can move it to 3b. But, if you move it to 5b, you're kind of going for a slower game. And when you go for a slower game with a Mino castle against Anaguma, it's not going to be a favorable position for White. The Anaguma castle is so hard. And, not only is he going to go for Anaguma, but maybe he'll go for a 4-piece Anaguma, where he opens this pawn, brings the silver over, brings his bishop back, and then backs his silver back into here. And you really, it's going to be a pain in the butt to face such a strong castle. So here, when Black is going for Anaguma, you want to go ahead and move your gold to 3b instead of 5b. And what this does is it makes your camp pretty strong against rook drops. So let's go ahead and highlight these squares. These are the squares that once you do end up making a rook trade, these are going to be the squares that Black's going to be able to try and rook hit or drop his rook on for the most part. But if you look at it, most of these squares are covered, um, and obviously he can't drop onto a piece. So the only place that he can drop to is 4A. But even if he does drop to 4A, he's really not threatening anything. All the pieces that he's threatening are protected, and also it's going to be very easy for White to go ahead and capture that rook. Well, let's go ahead and move this forward a little bit. Black is going to go ahead and close the hatch, and now White is going to go ahead and ask Black to make a pawn, or to make a rook trade on the second file. And, let's just see what happens, actually, if Black goes ahead and does decide to accept this rook trade. And we'll look at this rook drop on 4A. Basically, at this position, he's not threatening the goal, he's not threatening the silver. Really, the only thing he's threatening is this knight on 2A. But White can go ahead and make an own camp rook drop here on 2B. And actually, it's not, purely defensive. The second file, the second file is pretty open here. So he's still going to be threatening this knight on 2I, even when dropping his rook in his own camp. And after this, White can go ahead and, move his silver back here to 5B, or moving his gold over, something like that. So basically, it's going to be relatively easy for White to capture this. For White to capture this rook. I mean, he'd probably end up bringing his bishop back first, and then drawing his silver back to here. That way, him bringing the bishop back protects this square and also opens up the second file. So basically, Black's just not going to want to accept this rook trade because his rook drop on 4A just is not very strong. So at this position, Black is going to go ahead and drop his pawn to 2E, declining the rook trade. And White's going to have to go back. Now, basically, at this position, White didn't get to trade his rooks. So, it might seem like his attack is not working. But actually, he has a couple good attacks lined up ready to go here. One is going to be to move his silver up to 5D and threaten, go ahead and threaten the bishop's head here. That's an option. Another option he has is to push his fourth file pawn and open the bishop's diagonal and threaten a bishop trade. And this is not actually, Black doesn't really want to have White make a bishop trade because then he's going to have to take it with the silver and move his silver up to 7G, which is not a very good structure for an Anaguma castle. And finally, White also has this attack of pushing his third file pawn and then developing his silver to 3D and attacking this pawn on 2E. So Black has to stop one of those attacks somehow, and actually the biggest threat is the third file pawn push, and this silver coming over and attacking the pawn on 2E. So basically at this position, Black is going to have to go ahead and push his own third file pawn, preventing White from making that pawn push. So again, here, White has two options. He can go ahead and attack with the silver, or he can go ahead and open the bishop's diagonal. But if he goes ahead and just brings his silver over, attacking the bishop's head, it's going to be a little bit of a slower attack, because he's not doing anything to try and trade these rooks in the second file. And also, this opening the bishop's diagonal is probably a bigger threat to Black's camp anyway. If let's just assume we go for this silver attack, Black can just go ahead and close the bishop's diagonal, and then maybe bring his gold up here or something. It's not going to be too big of an issue. Just draw his bishop back and use it on this side. Maybe draw it back to here. I don't know, something like that. So basically, at this position, instead of bringing the silver up, it is an option, but instead of doing that, for our video, we're going to go ahead and push the pawn on the fourth file. You know, that was our other option. He denied our option of pushing the third file pawn, so we'll go ahead and open our bishop's diagonal. And threaten, you know, now making this bishop trade from our side, and forcing his silver up to the 7g square. So at this position, maybe black can make a bishop trade from his side, but then white will take it with the knight, and now the white is creating pretty good counterattack here. Or even, you know, now white can offer another rook trade like that, and it's kind of just letting white develop another piece for free, which is never a good idea. And actually, black has a better move anyway, and black's move now is to go ahead and push the second file pawn himself, offering and asking white now for a rook trade. And it might seem a little bit weird, but the difference is now that this pawn is pushed and the bishop's diagonals are open. So now, you know, white is going to accept this rook trade. Let's say you decided not to accept the rook trade, maybe, and you try and take the pawn with the bishop, but that's not going to be very good at all. That's going to be a loss for white, like that. And he loses material. So that's not an option. So instead, white is just going to go ahead and accept this rook trade. And, you know, the reason black can go ahead and be happy about making the rook trade now is that this bishop diagonal is open, and black can go ahead and promote his bishop, taking the lands on 1a. So basically now, here we go. Now white is going to go ahead and drop his rook to 2h. And the reason, and basically, you know, you might not think that this is a good situation for white. He has lost the lance, but he's going to be able to get that lance back pretty quickly if he wants to. And obviously he's going to be able to take this knight out pretty easily. And this is a pretty big threat on black's camp. And now white's strategy has been successful. He's been able to make a pawn trade, or a rook trade on the second file, and drop it into his opponent's camp before his opponent has finished castling his king into a strong Anaguma castle. And still, black's attack on white's camp is not that strong. You know, maybe he can take this knight, but then he can bring his bishop back attacking, and now his bishop has to go to or his horse has to go to a pretty useless square, and he's threatening this attack and this attack. So probably taking the knight isn't very good. Maybe a better play would be to drop his rook here. Probably go ahead and save the knight, developing it. I don't know, maybe rook promotion. Rook takes the knight. He has to defend. He takes the. Actually, I guess he can't take the lance anymore because the rook's in the way. But now it's threatening this, so maybe knight drop, and it's probably good for white. Black would be threatening this lance drop next, but he's going to have to defend this somehow, I think. But it's still a close position, maybe a little bit better for white. But basically the book didn't go any further than this rook drop as far as standard lines. And basically this just isn't very comfortable for black since his king the castle is not complete. It's going to be hard to attack white's camp. So especially if he has to drop his rook instead, his knight can escape. He's just going to have enough pieces to go ahead and try and attack. And his camp is pretty strong overall. It's pretty well balanced. So basically, black shouldn't have gone for Anaguma, is basically the moral of the story. But, you know, this will be a good video for how to attack with Mukaibisha when black pushes this pawn to 2e and goes for Anaguma. So that's all for this video. For my next video, I'll probably go into some lines when black, instead of trying to castle his king into Anaguma, he goes ahead and castles into a left-hand Mino or Silver Crown type